Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
A good barometer of the health of any community can be measured by those who visit and return to visit and experience the place again. In broad terms, we call that tourism. Welcome back, and thanks so much for watching the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy here in the Carolinas. The tourism chiefs from North and South Carolina together will weigh in on this year's events and activity and how it all manifests in visitor and hospitality numbers in a moment. Whit Tuttell and Duane Parrish join us again. We hope you'll stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Whit Tuttell from Visit North Carolina and Duane Parrish from the South Carolina Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism.
Hello, welcome to our program. So, Whit, Duane, good to have you both here.
Thanks.
You know, it's funny. You guys walk into the studio just like you're brothers and like you work together all the time. And it's heartwarming to see that. I'm glad to see that. We were just talking before the cameras came on that you will co-brand. And before we get to that, let's look at 2016, 2017. Whit, we'll start with you. What did 2016 formally come in as from growth, and what does 2017 look like? Same thing, Duane.
Sure. We had a 3.5% increase in visitor spending 2016. That's good, not great. We had a little bit of a reduction in the actual number of visitors, but what happened is we got the people who came, we got them to stay longer and spend a little more. So that helped. Obviously we had a tumultuous year last year with a lot of different things, and this year we're still seeing a growth. The rate of growth is slowing a little, but our rate is holding still, and it's going to be another record year, it looks like.
Yeah. Duane, what do you think?
Well, for one of our benchmark indicators, hotel revenue per available room came in at about almost 7% up in 2016.
Is that because the hoteliers raised their rates?
Part of it's raised the rates, but occupancy increased as well. And I think we did benefit particularly from some group business that did not go to North Carolina. We do share the same last name, so we picked up some of that, I think, south of the border. And I anticipate 2017 to be, quite frankly, an even better year because of the eclipse. We really picked up a lot of business from the eclipse.
Yeah, what was that like?
It was, Columbia, Charleston, and Greenville just had, normally a slow back-to-school start time of year in August, a Sunday and a Monday, and we were about almost 100% occupancy in those markets, and that's a big pickup for us.
Let me ask you something about this specifically. I know a lot of people did not see kind of the wave of what that was going to be. Not the hoteliers or the hospitality industry, but I think folks kind of thought about it at the last minute, and all of a sudden hotel rooms like the Clarion in Columbia was going for $600 a night.
Sure.
At what point, gentlemen, does this become a gouging issue where you'll step in and say, hold on a second here?
I think from my perspective, I'm a former hotelier, and I've always said anything more than double the rate is gouging. That's just sort of my rule. So, if a hotel rate is normally 200 and it's gone to 6, to me that's gouging. If it's 200 gone to 4 and the demand is that high for a special event, sure, I think that's okay. I think that's where you get into the gouging area in my perspective.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, we were fortunate, I think, in some ways in that where the eclipse came across the totality for North Carolina, it was way out in the western part of the state. There's not a lot of hotel product there, so it was a lot of condos and rentals. And we worked with the state, with Commerce, with DOT, with the police to make sure we didn't have any traffic issues or things like that. So I didn't hear of any of that rate issue coming up.
Does VRBO or any of the online services now, has that changed it yet again in the last 2 years? has changed the way you book hotels or even homes now.
Yeah, I think Airbnb is that's a game changer. You know, that's technology using it. It's similar to VRBO, but it's changed. It's made it so much easier for people to do that when they're looking for a longer stay or something different from a hotel, or in a place that maybe doesn't have the hotel inventory that other places do. Particularly for us, you know, in the mountains and the coast, there's a lot of places just don't have commercial lodging, so people are going to want to stay in cabins and condos.
So how do you answer the traditional hospitality worker, owner of a property to say, you know, Airbnb's making an in-run around me?
Well, sure. Well, Airbnb and Lyft are Airbnb and Home Away are to hotels what Lyft and Uber are to the taxi companies. You have to learn to coexist. I think we've come to that point. It didn't start that way, but they've come to that point. In both our states now, like Airbnb, for example, they're paying taxes now, just like the hotel. So there is parity in terms of the same playing field when it comes to that part of the equation.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest complaint.
Yeah, probably, we're not in the same playing field.
These guys have to level the playing field. They should pay their fair share.
Right. The hotels don't mind so much if they're helping to pay the fair share, both sales taxes and accommodation taxes, and it becomes a fair game. You know, you just have to compete, and it's a matter of what the end user wants. It's a different product for Airbnb and HomeAway than it is for a hotel.
Yeah. One of those unplanned events, Hurricane Matthew in fourth quarter of last year, and of course Irma that just kind of blew through the country. You guys were mobilized, no doubt. You had all your folks on standby. So give us a kind of a debrief of what happened. What happened in North Carolina, and of course South Carolina got hit. But how did you plan for it? How'd you weather it? No pun.
Sure. Well, for us, you know, Matthew was a real problem. Similar to what Houston went through with rain and flooding. And we have folks that are still suffering from the effects of Matthew. So it was a big blow to us at the end of the year. Fortunately, it wasn't in a heavy visitor period, so we've had time for places to repair and recover from that. That was good. And then with Irma, we were really in more of a position of hosting. We kept our welcome centers open on the interstate highways late to help people out. We ran our call center extra hours to help reaccommodate people. We had all our partners sending us availability, so we knew there was availability. We wanted to make sure we had rooms available for under $100 too during that for evacuees. So Irma turned out to be probably financially a blessing for us. But you know, we're still, a lot of the markets that come here are impacted by it.
Yeah, Duane?
Yeah, the lower part of our coast from Charleston south was affected by the storm, particularly the Barrier Islands, Hilton Head, Beaufort, Edisto. More of a water storm than a windstorm like Matthew, but we had just come off in some places getting back to normal from Matthew, and now this hit. Some of our feeder markets, as Whit mentioned, have been impacted, so a softening of demand. We've probably lost the time period that over that week that Irma took place, both the planning and post-storm, probably lost $100 million along the coast just from business. We did get some evacuees from Florida who stayed. But they've gone, you know, they went back shortly after the storm, and so the booking, the hard part of that is getting the booking trend, because there is a lead time, is getting the booking trend, getting it restarted, because people in Ohio just hear the word Carolina and they hear coast and hurricane and they cancel the reservation anytime of the next 60 days.
You know, this is interesting. You talk about Charleston, the Low Country, and places south around Edisto. Has it now just become the 100-year flood happens every 2 or 3 years down there, it seems like? Does Charleston specifically have more of a flooding problem?
It does. It's very close to sea level, particularly the historic district, and it has flooding at times during high tide and king tides when the sort of stars align, if you will, lunar tides. It'll flood in some areas now. What happened during Irma was that we had high tide came at the same time as a lunar tide as the storm surge. And so it was normally a 7-foot tide became 10. And so a lot of downtown flooded, both in Charleston and Beaufort. And so when you're that close to sea level, you're going to have some flooding. You know, I think it's something that particularly Charleston and some of the coastal areas are now adjusting to, long-term planning in terms of how they adapt to flooding and drainage. You know, there is some long-term planning going to fix that. But in the meantime, it's just something that, quite frankly, it's just a way we have to adapt to. The good news is we're getting good at it. We have had a lot of practice the last few years.
Well, and the same thing happened. You were talking about last year, OBX Gold Coast. I mean, they kind of had their head handed to them in many ways, and it kind of rejiggered the whole coast in many different dimensions. So what happens about this 100-year flood that seems to happen much more than every 100 years?
Yeah, you know, it does. I think we've got to look at that and adjust and figure out ways of you know, maybe shifting where we put our assets and things like that where we can. Now, you know, some of it we can't. That's just the peril of being on a, you know, on a tiny barrier island 26 miles out in the ocean. Part of what makes the place so magical is that it is that fragile. So I think we'll continue to deal with it, you know, and deal with it as best we can.
The seasonal worker is very important to the hospitality industry. I know I'm preaching to the choir here to some degree, but immigration in this country has been a very hot button, and H-2B visas is a seasonal visa. And that has been greatly restricted. How punitive was it this year?
Well, I think it hurts us. It hurts us, particularly in the peak time. You know, so much of our travel comes when the kids are out of school and families want to come to the beach or go to the mountains, and we just need those bodies there. And it affects the small businesses, their ability to run their business and to compete with other businesses. And I think the bottom line is, if you don't have that staff or you can't get the staff, it affects the job you do and the service you level, the quality of service, and you don't want to sacrifice that. We really need it.
Yeah, it's been a problem. Areas like Kiowa, Hilton Head, and those Bear Islands, that's where they depend, the H-2B visas, where they depend on a lot of the labor force. It's been very restrictive and difficult for them. They've had to, you know, you have to market to get employees, almost like you do to get it.
Is it crisis though situation, Duane? Would you call it a crisis?
It's not crisis level yet, but if it continues and we don't find a way to solve the labor issue, yes, it could be.
I read something somewhere, and it might have been the state in Columbia, that they were holding a job fair just to find construction workers for projects.
That's correct.
Is that in response to the H-2B visa? Is that the seasonal worker, or is that some other dynamic going on?
Well, some of that may have been from the nuclear plant that SCANA and Santee Cooper recently shut down. There were about 5,000 construction workers available. There was an opportunity there to find construction workers. You know, we've had some infrastructure funding now come into the state, and our DOT has got more projects that they're working on, so they're trying to find people. So, but the labor market, you know, unemployment's down to 4.3%. That's almost considered full employment. So it's difficult to find people, whether you're in construction or hospitality, whatever the case may be.
Transportation infrastructure continues to be a challenge. Of course, education and transportation are the two biggest challenges, not just in General Assemblies, but in communities. So how much, again, to use the term punitive, restrictive, how hard is DOT, not DOT's job per se, but how critical is it that Department of Transportation, let's start with you, Duane, in South Carolina uses this newfound money from the advancement of gas taxes? How is it important for Christy Hall and DOT to get it right, and how much are you depending on that?
Well, we depend on a lot. You know, it is 80% of people come into our state come in by way of car. So the interstate system and the secondary highway system is critical to move visitors around. We're very fortunate we got that gas tax money, and Director Hall will certainly put it to great use. We have a lot of projects already lined up. You know, quite frankly, our Interstate 95 should be 3 lanes all the way through the state. It's not. But we know that we know that those kinds of things. Interstate 26 from Charleston to Columbia should be 3 lanes. We'll get there. It takes time, obviously, but the good news is we've got a higher dedicated source of funding now to be able to get those projects completed.
Yeah, and North Carolina's not immune to the DOT challenge.
Oh no, that's probably our biggest issue coming up is transportation infrastructure. You know, we get nearly 90% of the visitors to North Carolina drive. And when you come here, you drive. And some of our biggest attractions, like the Blue Ridge Parkway, are all about driving. So we need those highways. You know, we have one of the biggest highway systems, state highway systems in the country. So it's massive, and it's incredibly important to us.
Is it punitive to the point that that the Carolinas are not competitive as they can be with other destinations?
I don't think we're at that point yet.
No, we're not at that point. I don't think a visitor makes a decision based on that. What happens if you have a bad experience when you do come to the state,
right,
you remember that when you're thinking about the next trip.
You know, there's been a lot of talk about Horry County and Myrtle Beach, and with the massive growth down there, and with the infrastructure that's been, well, you could argue about that, the infrastructure within Myrtle Beach and Horry County and the Grand Strand, but you still can't get there, Duane. What is the holdup? Why can't there seem to be some consensus about building an interstate that terminates?
Well, I think the consensus has been there. The difficult part are 2 things, is funding and then the environmental part of it, and that's being able to put the interstate I-73 in places where there's more private land ownership now, which is, you know, you have to acquire. And the good news is the funding is there now for the most part. They've agreed to the toll part of it. I think in the next 5 to 6 years, you'll see a good part of that interstate get completed. Right now, it's the largest destination in the country without an interstate going.
Is it negotiating right away? Is that all it is?
Negotiating right away, environmental approvals, funding, which is now the good news. Congressman Tom Rice, who's on Ways and Means, has helped get some of that funding in place. In addition to that, the federal DOT, our state DOT, and the ability to put tolls in has opened the window to get this done.
What do you think?
Glad it's not a bridge. You want to talk about environment and funding? Takes a long time to get a bridge.
Well, what are the pressure points in North Carolina for transportation?
Well, I think we see that a lot on the Outer Banks, and the industry I think has done a lot to adjust to it. We used to be 7 days on the Outer Banks. If you were going there, you would stay for 7 days, and you would check in everybody at the same time and check out everybody at the same time. And I think we've become more flexible to try and work around those infrastructure problems. But you have to have that transportation. You have to have a viable bridge, and you have to have one that works and is reliable for people.
And hopefully the construction crew working on the bridge does not put a pole down through the power outage. How long did that go?
Power too.
Probably hoping
power
to miss that
really
one.
helps.
That's like you brought up Santee, Cooper, and Scannon. I wasn't even going to go there. But
yeah, thank you.
We can't. I want to talk about Myrtle Beach just for a second. Come back to you, Duane.
Sure.
Myrtle Beach has been in the news for some violence and some things that are a bit nefarious and have taken the shine off of that family destination. How critical is this for them to get this right?
It is critical. I mean, law enforcement, it's about blue lights and badges. People want security when they travel, and it's critical they get this right. I think they're working through some of that now. It's much better. Statistically, if you compare them to other destinations of a similar size in terms of population, they're not in the top 10. What's happened is their resort destination, and social media has brought it to light and brought it to people who normally wouldn't see those kinds of things.
Do you have any challenges that approach that in North Carolina when it comes to personal safety and issues? Well,
we had some issues last year in Charlotte, and in fact, last year, we had to activate our crisis plan 7 times. So, and I worked in Florida, and that would be crazy in Florida. You don't expect that in North Carolina, and everything that happens like that, it's like the traffic, and it's like the not having enough employees. It just harms that visitor experience a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit. And you don't want to damage that repeat visitor. The most valuable visitor we have is the repeat visitor. They come back and they come back. We don't have to market to them anymore. They market for us. And so all those little things add up to maybe I'll try somewhere else, and that's what we don't want to get to.
So, to look at this a little bit more metaphysically, is this because the growth of the Carolinas is now becoming it's becoming a different place? The cities are getting bigger. There are more people around the table. There's a lot more money, transportation. There's a lot more stress on the structure. Is that what we're looking at?
I think in a lot of ways it is. It's growing pains. We're maturing. As a market, as a tourism market, as an economy, we've become this power. North and South Carolina, population-wise, we're growing.
Yes.
Industries, tech. We're growing. We're becoming a power, but to do that, you've got to evolve.
How do you with Charleston at one point, and still might be the hottest growing metro in the country.
Yeah.
But with that comes the darker side.
Sure.
So how does that kind of flush against what you're trying to do in tourism?
Well, it puts a pressure on a lot of things, particularly a city that has a peninsula as its downtown, which is surrounded by water on 3 sides. Transportation, infrastructure are critical. Mass transit becomes a big issue. Charleston's going through some of those growing pains now. There's an average of 45 people a day moving there. South Carolina as a whole is the second most in-migration state in the country. So a lot of people come in and they really want to be close to the coast, and South Carolina's weather, population, and other things and quality of life but what you don't want to do with the in-migration is destroy the goose that's laying the golden egg that makes you what you are. So maintaining that character, particularly a place like Charleston, which has such a unique character, it's critical to that. So it's sort of a managed tourism growth. Mayor Riley, who was there for 40 years, did a fantastic job, which is one of the reasons he's such a great mayor, managing that sort of tourism growth, but at the same time using tourism to help fund some of that growth of the city. Mayor Tecklenburg, who's in place now, is doing the same. I think that we'll go through it. At some point in the next 10 years, there'll be a little bit of a slowdown in the economy, which will in turn slow down some of that growth. But in the meantime, it's something that and even smaller municipalities sort of try to keep their grip on that so that it doesn't get out of control.
How do you have your staffs and your groups and your strategy interface with commerce, departments of commerce? Both states have done just excellent doesn't even say it, it's understating, but an excellent job growing the region over the last generation. So where is the tourism play in economic development? How do you interface?
Well, I think we've, a real advantage to us is we were privatized from the Department of Commerce about 5 years ago, and we went over into this economic development partnership in North Carolina with our business development people. So when we look at economic development, we don't say economic development and tourism. We say tourism is part of economic development. And so that helps. And we help the business development guys when they're at a show and they're trying to pitch a company to come here. They're using our tourism video. They're using our imagery. We're using the same brand. We're using the same pitch. And so by putting those two together, I think it's really helped. It's given us a seat at the table that tourism rightly deserves. You know, I mean, it's a $24 billion industry in North Carolina, employs more than 200,000 people. It's business. Sure, it's fun, but it's business.
Well, will there ever be a time in South Carolina when PRT, Parks, Recreation, Tourism, is actually under South Carolina Department of Commerce, Chamber, or Commerce?
No, but Commerce might be under PRT. No, I'm just kidding.
Now you sound like Bobby.
Bobby and I are joined at the hip. I mean, we literally work together on many, many things. And as I like to tell Bobby, no one moves a business without becoming a visitor there first. And I said, it's about quality of life, though, for everyone there. And if a business is looking at the many things they do, one of those is the quality of life for the employees. That's where tourism comes in, whether it's parks, whether it's attractions, whether it's the dining option, whatever those things are. These provide a quality of life for visitors, and it's all about that. And quite frankly, as Whit mentioned, you know, tourism is a big part of economic development. It's almost $21 billion in our state, and it's about 10% of our workforce. And by many measures, one of the largest industries in the state. And so it all becomes part of the same thing. I mean, people want that quality of life. If you want to move people here from another country or from the Northeast or from the Midwest, they want to know how far away is the beach? What's the beach like? Where can I go eat? Where are my kids going to go to a park? And those kinds of things where tourism comes into play, what attractions are around. Those become an integral part of economic development.
So we got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and going forward now, 2017 looks like it's going to be a decent year. Last year, North Carolina had, I know you don't want to hear this again, Whit, but we got to bring it up, HB2, not H-2B visas, but HB2. South Carolina had moving the Confederate flag, but also running in the background is still the culture of the Confederacy. There's also these issues around social that end up bleeding out into the brand of the region. That seems like it's becoming more and more front and center when it comes to the brand of a region. Is that what we can expect to see going forward now?
Unfortunately, I think it is. You know, last year we were the flashpoint of what is really a national issue with HB2. This year, I don't want to be the flashpoint again, the battleground for another national issue with Confederate monuments and things like that. But I think that's really the whole South. But what really worries me is that people are trying to use tourism as a weapon in boycotts and things like that based on this politics, and it shouldn't be that way. Tourism is about opening doors and opening minds. It's not about closing them. So what really disturbs me is when people use these political reasons to not go somewhere or tell their people or their employees not to go somewhere.
You think those tactics are effective? Sorry to interrupt you, but
I don't think they are. I don't think you change people by not interacting with them. I think you change people by interacting with them. So I think it's the opposite, and I think you're hurting the people you're trying to help who maybe support you or agree with you in that place where you're not going to go.
Duane, South Carolina's had their challenges. I mean, how do you come down on this?
Well, it's just is what Whit just said. You know, people politicize, organizations and companies politicize that sometimes, and it has the opposite effect of what they're trying to do. I think you do, and you come interact. You know, we had the flag up for almost 15 years, and you know, once it came down, you know, so nationally it's an issue which brings it back to light, obviously, but nationally it's an issue now with the monuments. I mean, but you know, quite frankly, you know, travel is the one way, if you think about it, to really integrate yourself into what do other people, other cultures, other experiences, what are they like? And travel is the place where you can experience those and kind of, quite frankly, bring some of the rhetoric down a little bit, I think.
Is that what you hear from your, I'm going to call it your members, but the industry in general, as you've both described it? I mean, what's the dialogue that happens in light of some of these social issues? Is that what you're hearing from your members? Yeah,
that is the dialogue. You know, they don't want it to be, you know, they just like to move on and not have that be part of the issue. You know, while they know it's there, they don't want to deal with it. And by that I mean they don't want to, you know, you won't see a lot of hoteliers, for example, go and give a position on the flag. if you will, back when it was up. Fortunately, it's a non-issue now, and that's the way they'd like it to be, and things are much better, at least in South Carolina. But I just don't think they want something they want to be as a daily part of work that they have to worry about.
In the last minute left, and literally we've got a minute left, what do you think 2018 is going to look like? What kind of growth? We asked you this last time. You got pretty close. No pressure.
Okay, so I'll say slow growth. We're seeing, demand's still increasing, but it's not increasing that much, and our supply is really growing. And so you don't want to have more supply than demand, or you may get to cut in rate. So I think we'll be up, maybe 2.5%.
Okay. Duane, what do you think?
Well, I think 2017 is going to be a really big year for us if we can stay away from hurricanes. And due in part to the eclipse. That added a big August. This will be the best August we've ever had in 17. 18, I think, will be somewhere between 4 to 5% growth.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, let's split the difference and say 3.25 then.
But for us all, that'll work.
All right. Back here same time next year, guys. Thank you for being on the program. Always like seeing you two together. It's great.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for watching our program. Certainly, if you have any questions or comments or anything, carolinabusinessreview.org. Good night. See you next week.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Bearings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.